All right, welcome back to another episode of the It Starts With You podcast. Today, I am so excited and honored to have this conversation with Yosi Kossowsky, and we're talking all about tapping into your emotional intelligence and one of my favorite words, curiosity, and how Yasi helps people with this curiosity mindset. So, Yasi, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're so welcome, Julie. I'm really glad to be here.
Oh my goodness, so excited to talk about this. So, today's guest is Yosi Kossowsky, a seasoned executive coach with over 17 years of experience and a background as a chief technology officer and senior director of talent management. Yasi specializes in leadership development, personal growth, and effective communication, leveraging neuroscience. I love it. I love fellow neuroscience geek to talk about, and organizational development principles. He's helping leaders across the globe navigate complex challenges, build high performing teams, and drive meaningful change. Get ready to learn actionable strategies to enhance your leadership skills and foster a culture of trust and collaboration. We have so much synchronicities in what we love to help people with, Yasi.
I know it's amazing. I love it.
I love it so much. Okay, so share with us a little bit. So your background in, so you were a chief technology officer, senior director of talent management. So give us a little bit of the highlight reel of the background, the experiences that you have, and what brought you into the coaching space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have come to understand that I've taken a bit of a funny route to get to where I am today. I started off my career in IT and loving technology when it was first coming out in the early 90s, and did that for about 10 years. Tried technical sales, which wasn't really a great I think I did well, but I didn't love it. And then went into engineering and loved that. A few years into that, I had an opportunity to take some leadership roles. And really quickly after that, I started getting feedback that I wasn't so good at the leadership roles. And, now I can just talk about it. At the time, it really threw me. I had taken some leadership courses and read a number of books, and I thought I knew what to do. And the feedback clearly indicated that I didn't. So some soul searching, and I kind of came to the idea that maybe I knew what to do, but I certainly didn't know how to do it. And as an engineer, the how to is always the challenge. You can read all of these things, but you got to get your hands dirty. You got to go play and do. So I'm like, okay, how do I do that deep dive on people? How do I learn that? And so after some searching and talking to a lot of people, I ended up starting to study neuroscience and emotional wellness therapy. My thought being at the time as an engineer, hardware and software of people. So let's get that covered. And it was life transformational. As I started to learn about what it takes holistically to have a thriving brain and a thriving body, I started to understand what I wasn't doing for myself in terms of nutrition and exercise and sleep and learning. And on the emotional wellness side, really starting to learn about triggers, perception, how what I understand influences the way that I make sense of the world and then respond and react to the world around me. And then that really started informing me where I had gone all wrong with working with others was, what does it mean to actively listen? What is all of those emotional components that I need to start to put into practice to have patience, to have a facial response, to clarify understanding, and get out of my own way and at the same time. And then the same thing about helping people grow. What does it mean to help people grow when I was making other people's growth really all about me and my success? And then how do I really do something for other people where I need to also let go of the outcome? I need to enact a lot of curiosity to understand what's important to them, not what's important to me. And so as I started learning these things, firstly, I brought them back to home and started really seeing a lot of changes with my relationships at home. And funny enough, my relationship with my wife really improved. My relationship with my kids didn't. Like they were young and they started wondering, who's this guy who's changing on me? I don't think that they really understood what was going on. Now, years later, I can say that it's all a win-win, but at the time it was kind of funny. And then as I started bringing these skills into the workplace, they were noticeable. I got a lot of great feedback. A lot of other leaders came to me and started saying, "Okay, help me understand what the changes you're making." And that was my pre-coaching coaching experience, was helping other leaders this way. And so when I finished those certifications, I decided I did want to go get a coaching certification, and I finished that in about 2012. And then before I decided, okay, am I going to like rebuild my, redo my career? The company I was in got acquired by Cisco, a larger company, and it just gave me this opportunity to actually start to apply all of these new passion areas. What I started joking with at the time is going to be human engineering over computer engineering,
Oh, I
and
love that.
and that just ultimately led me to where I am today.
Hmm. Oh my goodness. So obviously we've known each other, Yasi. Yasi and I have been connected. Yasi is a client and I get the honor to work with him. But there are so many more layers to your story that I didn't even know yet until you just shared those. And
Yeah, there's always those good layers, right?
I love it. I really love asking whenever I have a guest. I love asking, like, how did you get here? Because so often I find that people listening see so many pieces of themselves when people share this journey. And I already have like a whole page of notes of things I want to address. I'm like, oh my goodness, we're going to need 5 podcasts because you talked about so many things. So, first, I just have to highlight because what's so fascinating is your background in IT and engineering and how you use that, you use that mindset to almost, on people, which is so interesting because I know you and I have talked about this from a perspective of when we're working with teams. If there's certain teams who, are a little bit more like intricate into the details, sometimes, not always, sometimes they might not have as many of the people skills and they might struggle with some of those things. And so you had this experience that you were able to transfer. Okay, if I could do this and figure this out as an engineer, I can do the same thing with people.
Right.
I love that that's the approach that you took to go, what can I do? One of the first things I think I want to lean into is when you got that feedback, because we hear this a lot from people, they get feedback and they get kind of blindsided because they think they're doing a good job. So when you got that feedback and all of a sudden you had that moment, that realization where you went, wow, I'm not doing as good as I thought I was in showing up for people. Some people, we really have two choices there, right? You could have just like been like, oh, they're wrong. So
Yeah.
I guess just take us into that moment a little bit of like, how did you decide, I'm actually going to do something about this?
So I'm going to take you back even further in my history. As a kid, growing up in the early 70s, where we didn't have a lot of the understanding we do now of learning disabilities and challenges, etc., I got to third grade and I still didn't know how to read. And the teachers, I was in a regular day school, and the teachers didn't know what to do. And so they told my parents, look, I don't know if they labeled me or if I picked up a label from on my own, but essentially the label that I started carrying around was I was retarded.
Mm,
And
hmm.
they took me to a psychiatrist and I got assessed and everything. And I don't, again, know really what the findings were, but I did have to change schools and went to this school for people who needed more attention and more help.
Hmm.
And it was really traumatic. And ultimately, it started setting me up with a mindset that why would I ever assume I'm right? And as a kid, it didn't serve, I don't think it served me. And I certainly carried around a lot of baggage with that.
Hmm.
However, in this instance, funny enough, when I got the feedback, I never assumed that I was right. I was surprised, but I didn't assume like that they were wrong. I'm like, of course they're right. And here's something else that I thought I had and I don't have. And so, really, for me, the emotional piece was, and you and I have talked about self-esteem,
Hmm.
was falling into my pit of despair and saying, okay, and because of my childhood, not absolutely because of my childhood, but because I had spent so long growing and taken some therapy and growing out of those labels that I had, I already had learned the technique of, okay, you can wallow for a little bit, but eventually you got to get up and pull yourself out of your bootstraps and say, what are you going to do differently? What are you going to do next? And
Mhm.
so that was the internal process.
Oh, thank you for being vulnerable to share this. One of the qualities that I just really admire about you. Every conversation we have when we're talking one on one or in our group settings in the program, like you show up with this level of authenticity and vulnerability and transparency, and it really helps people relate to you. So first, thank you for sharing that because I know that so many people can relate of being labeled as something. Somebody told them something that they were or weren't something. And we know this from our coaching experience and from, some people call it the gremlin or the inner critic. Like there's different names for it, but it starts in childhood, usually right around the ages that you talked about. And some version of we're not good enough. And now we carry that into an adult and it holds us back. And so you
Right.
carried this with you. And so it's really interesting because all of the hurt that it created and the things it held you back from in this instance.
Right.
And this is what's so amazing. I had goosebumps when you said it because so many people like fight this inner critic, like, oh, I like almost like I hate you. I can't believe you've done this. But it actually is there to help. It is
Right.
there to help because it's trying to protect us from something. And so in this case, it actually helped you move forward to go, okay, maybe it did not the right frame to think like, oh, I'm never right, but it allowed you to open up
Right.
to getting it. So that's so fascinating. And now, so you work with leaders and you see this in them, I'm sure. I'm sure when you're coaching them or doing workshops, you see this stuff coming up for them.
Absolutely. And again, not strategically in a sense. However, I did learn and I have learned and all of the work from Brene Brown really just reinforced it for me was the more that I am willing to share where I've come from and what I've had to do to get to where I am, it does give people other permission as well to do that. And so I will go there in a one-on-one coaching or in group coaching workshops because what I found is I don't really know how we make the growth that we want to make without looking inside. And if all we can do when we look inside is cringe and run away and not find the leverage points for it, then we get stuck. And one of my more favorite quotes that's attributed to Einstein is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and hoping for a different result. Um, and I say this almost all the time, and it comes up in almost every coaching session when people say, "Yeah, but I'm not really comfortable, doing something different." And I'm like, "Then why are you here?" You know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, I mean, again, so many people will just keep fighting it. They'll be stuck. They won't be getting the results they want, but you have to be willing to get to the root. And we know that, like the surface level, I'm going to give you, you help your clients through either one-on-one or workshops and things like that with your programs. You help people with things like I'm sure tough conversations and giving, people feedback and all of that stuff. That's that's at the surface level. Like you can give them the tools to do it. But if
Right,
you don't get to the root of why they're not doing it or their level of self-awareness about how it comes off when they're doing
right.
it, then we're never going to create the actual sustainable change that's needed.
100%. There's a leader right now that I'm coaching, and he is definitely has the characteristics of a very logic driven person. And he goes into his meetings and he lays out the information and all of that. But he keeps on getting the feedback that he's not engaging and that essentially he's hitting a ceiling in terms of where he can grow in the organization because he's not displaying these other traits that people are looking for. And he's like, I want to develop these. And he's amazing in that he is pushing himself out of his comfort zone. And we've had these conversations about it is going to be uncomfortable to go out of your comfort zone. That's why it's called a comfort zone. And yeah, if we don't, then we don't move, and ultimately we start to either have one or two choices. Either I learn how to do this thing in this situation, and I don't know how to repeat it in other situations, or I do go deeper and start to understand what is that more root cause analysis thing from where how I'm showing up, and then all of a sudden I can start to apply the changes I want to have in multiple situations.
So, in everything you've talked about, and I know obviously curiosity, that's a big word. You're talking about it with this keynote that you're developing. One of my favorite words. I know when I'm talking to clients and we talk about kind of this vision versus curiosity, it's like, what would it look like to just be curious about this? People tend to gravitate towards that word. And so for you, you had to really like adopt, lean into whatever this curiosity mindset to figure out and like self-diagnose like what were you doing as a leader, and what do people do, how do people work, and then once you did that, you saw this change in your personal relationships, your professional relationships, and then it allowed you to get into the coaching space, which I'm sure before that you would never like even probably consider doing, and had you not had that curiosity mindset, nor would you have.
Right.
So
100%.
so tell us about this curiosity, like when for yourself, but also for those that you're working with. What does that even mean for someone to, just have more curiosity about these things?
So just to share about where it kind of solidified for me, when I was doing the emotional wellness therapy work, the teacher kept on highlighting that the enlightened space is the space of I don't know. And that was like the seed of the idea of, okay, getting to I don't know. And getting to I don't know means letting go of assumptions, letting go of assertions, letting go of expectations. And that was a tremendous amount of work for me. And I think that's an ongoing piece of work for me is as humans, I think our brains are hardwired to make sense of every situation. And we end up having to fill in a lot of unknown spaces, and we fill them in with assertions, assumptions, and expectations. The problem becomes that we believe them, and we maybe don't recognize that they are assumptions that I've made up ultimately, and then they become data points that I'm going to make decisions on and act on and react on. And so often when I'm working with leaders and they're not getting the results that they want, we start to have these conversations. Why are you doing what you're doing? What's the motivation? What's the thought process behind it? And it's just full of assumptions. And so in coaching, you learn how to use a lot of inquiry, how to ask a lot of open-ended questions to help people dig deeper. And so I'm like, okay, so I learned this idea of trying to get to the I don't know space in the therapy world. And then I had learned this idea of questioning in the coaching world. And then I see the world around me where we're jumping to conclusions and we've got conflict and we've got a lot of blame and the sky keeps on falling on everything that happens. But in reality, I don't know anybody who's a prophet. So I don't know anybody who can really tell me what the future holds. Just, we make these assumptions and maybe we have a lot of data points to point to our assumptions. And yet it's still imagination of assumption. And I kept on finding that when I'm working with leaders, if we started practicing, what if I don't know? What if all of these things I'm telling myself, the stories in my head, all, I don't know, then what becomes possible? What options do I have? What choices do I have? And so this really translated for me into curiosity as giving it like essentially a label of saying curiosity to me is the goal, is the saving grace that if we can bring more curiosity into our day to day, what will change? What what experiences of mine will change? What interactions of mine will change? Will I be less stressed? Will I be more stressed? Will I have better relationships? Have a better impact? If I can come at a situation and recognize I've filled in the spaces with assumption, so that I can say, okay, what if I let go of all of those assumptions? What might I see differently? What might I understand differently? How might I react differently? So that's probably a very long-winded answer to your
Oh
question.
no, yeah, see, it was so good. I'm sitting here writing down. So, oh my goodness, I just feel so honored to just have people like you in my world and to have on this podcast to bring to people because what you just said there, I truly believe is life changing for people. I truly believe it. And so I'm going to tell everybody right now, we're about, I think he started talking about that, I think around 19 minutes in. And I'm going to tell everybody to pause and re-listen to that. And Yasi, as your coach, I'm going to tell you that when this podcast comes out, you go back and listen to what you just said because it is life changing for people. And also, you're going to remember your inner genius that you just shared with all of us because that was absolutely, I mean, and I think sometimes those are such big things. Like we get caught up in this day to day of just like doing the things, and so you just sometimes what you just said, like we just need to like sit. I was like trying to sit in it for a minute because you said like, what if we came at things from this like, what if I don't know? And you said we tend to fill in the gaps with these assumptions, right? And so what if we came at it from the I don't know? And then you said, what becomes possible? Oof. And then you said if I bring more curiosity into this, what will change? Those are
Yeah,
huge shit because when we do that, everything changes. Everything shifts. Like if you take the time, if you just take a minute to ask yourself those things before reacting on things. And you and I have talked about this from a professional standpoint, absolutely. As a leader, if you can adopt this curiosity mindset and take a minute and have that awareness, it changes. But also from a personal, but also from a world perspective. Like, what
right.
if all of us showed up more like Yasi in the world and intentionally worked on curating this curiosity mindset versus the assumptions? How could we shift the world?
Right. I'll be honest with Julie. It is a work,
Yeah.
and I go to the gym regularly, thankfully, and sometimes people are not re-racking their equipment, and it really it triggers me. Like I'm like, how are you not doing that? And I have to remind myself, be curious, be curious, be curious. You don't know what's going on, you don't know what
You're
they're
human
thinking.
too. You're human too, so your humanness was showing a bit.
Yeah. So I like to give people the example of driving on the highway and somebody cuts you off. How do you respond and react?
Hmm.
And most people say, yeah, I get a little frustrated. Maybe I use some four-letter words.
Hmm.
And I'm like, have you ever cut somebody off? And they're like, yeah. But, and they automatically put a but after it and start explaining. I'm like, see,
Me too. It was, yeah.
you know why you did it.
Yeah.
But why are you assuming that everybody else has a bad reason and only you have a good reason?
Mm. And I want to hone in on that it's kind of a joke, but also again the human point of like, okay, someone's not doing something, and it's easy for us to blame or to just like, oh, they're just lazy or they don't care about other people. There could be so much more, and I know sometimes people are like, well, there's not. And I've actually used that example with driving when I teach this leadership training around these different energy levels and the different responses that we could take on, right? And
Right.
it's like just like I always say, like just play in the sandbox for now and just imagine, like, what if they cut you off because they had an emergency and they're rushing to the hospital because something happened, or just what if, like, what does that make you, how does that make you shift? And but when you talk about that, you said, it takes work. When you adopt that curiosity mindset in those little micro moments of someone not putting their weights back, it's the practice, it's the reps you're putting in to make it
A
easier down the
hundred,
road.
right. I, this brings up that other point, which is I think most people have come to understand that I can't just brush my teeth once and they're going to be clean and not going to get cavities. It's got to be this regular practice. And with a lot of our hygiene, but with our emotional hygiene, as it were, we sometimes want it to be one and done. Like, okay, so I've practiced that once, that should just now show up forever. And I don't think we're built that way, where our emotional intelligence muscle is a one and done.
Yeah, so let's lean into that a little bit because I know this is something that obviously you've done. You've put a lot of the heavy lifting in, and now it's. I don't know if I guess I'd be curious. Like, is it like, do you feel like it's maintenance for you now? But you've done a lot of the things, and now you continue doing it, and you also help clients with that, and you're developing this amazing keynote around curiosity. And so, if someone's listening right now and they're going, all right, this is like the hold up the mirror moment where I'm like, yeah, I've been making a lot of assumptions and I would like to be more curious, but I don't know how. Like, give us some things that you either use with your clients that you're talking about in your keynote of how do you develop more curiosity?
So I think that I recommend a couple of tips and tricks. And the first one is self-compassion. I don't know how to hold up the mirror without feeling like, oh, I could have done better. And that's true. And I said to you this other thing, which is I have come to take on a belief that our low self-esteem is actually the greatest gift that life has ever given us because it gets us motivated to move, to change, even though it feels sucky. And just because it feels sucky doesn't mean it's bad. And so self-compassion is the first piece. And again, that we could probably talk for hours on self-compassion. The second thing is start to practice it outward. I find that maybe it's harder to hold the mirror up for ourselves. So I tell people, when you want to start to practice in a sense of curiosity, go into your life, whether it's your work, your home, etc. And when people are saying things to you and you feel like I just want to answer them, I want to give them the answer, I want to give them the information, shift and play a game where you have to try to start every response with one of three words. What, how, or tell me more. So, Julie, if I say to you, I really didn't think that that coaching session gave me what I needed. If you had to respond with what or how or tell me more, how would you respond to me?
I would say, Cassie, tell me more about why you feel that way.
Right? And
I mean,
so,
because you just told me what I should be saying, so I thank you for the guidance.
right, 100%. And so a couple of things happen is you start to say, okay, well, I'm being curious because I'm asking these questions. By the way, the one caveat is to avoid the word why as a starter, because why tends to be, for whatever reason, a potentially triggering word. So what, how, or tell me more. And it also quickly avoids conflict or judgment, because rather than you saying maybe getting defensive, instead of being curious, like, what do I really mean when I said that? What am I really pointing to? What aspect did I perceive or whatever? Then all of a sudden you're not pushing back on me, and then I don't feel the need to push back on you. Rather, you're like creating a space and say, okay, so tell me more. And then I'm like, oh, I have to tell you more. So now I've got to actually go deeper and tell you more. And then you can have a better clarity about what it was that I was really trying to say to begin with. And curiosity starts to pay off. And what I tell people is after they start to see if it pays off when you're doing that, what if you start to ask yourself those questions when you're saying something in your head? Like, I can't believe they're idiots because they don't re-rack their gym stuff. I'm like, so okay, so tell me more about what I'm thinking. Well, I'm thinking that I really want them to do that. Why do I really want them to do that? And here I'm using a why question for myself, but um, you know, and it really is again how deep I want to go or how deep I know how to go to start to understand what is the motivator of my reaction to what I'm seeing around me. Because
Love
it's not just that they're not doing something. I've got a whole set of underlying foundations that is driving that.
Yeah, and it's like this. It's such a great example, right? Because it's not just that they didn't do that. For us, it's like this deeper thing. Usually around like we feel like for that one, it just makes me think it almost feels like we feel like they dishonored our value of ours, which your value might be like respect for other people. And by
Right.
doing that, they like somehow dishonored your like value of like they're not respecting other people. But they
Right.
don't know that. Like it's so fascinating. So you said so self-compassion, which so important. I love that you said that when we hold up that mirror, which is what we do in self-awareness, when you go through coaching or training, like you're doing it. But you said, the being hard on yourself or having that low self-esteem is going to get triggered. And so that low self-esteem is the greatest gift life can give us. Oof. That one too, it's like people, I feel like you have to sit with that one because it's like, wait, what? And then when you explained it, it's like, yeah, sometimes those are the things. So self-compassion and then practicing it outward. And I just want to reiterate what Yasi said around using what, how, or tell me more questions because those are practical things. Like if you're sitting here listening and going, I want to get better at that in my personal life with my spouse or my partner or with my kids, or I want to get better at that in my work, my leadership with my clients or with my team. These are the practical things you can start doing, and those little I call them like micro moments is what's going to add up until it
Right.
becomes easier and easier, just like it has for Yasi and all of the time. And he's still not done. He still puts in the work. He still intentionally does it.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give a plug to somebody else completely who I've never met, but James Clear in his book Atomic Habits,
Love
he
it.
talks a lot about the things we need to do to build the systems for change.
Mm-hmm.
And so my system for change is when I'm really trying to like remember to do something is I put post-it notes around my monitor
Mm-hmm.
with little keywords. And so I still have a post-it note that says what, how, tell me more. It's not so big, but and I'm not always looking at it, but I
Mm-hmm.
do look at it probably a couple of times a week, and I'm like, oh yeah, right. Got to remember to practice what I preach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that you bring that up. We've talked about that book on the podcast multiple times before. Either I think I even did a whole session, said a year. Gosh, I don't have to look back what that was. There's a for those of you listening, I did a prior episode where I went through some of my favorite books, and Atomic Habits was there. And then I think I've talked to a couple guests about it. It's actually a good reminder. I want to. There's some of those books you could just keep rereading.
Yeah,
That's one because I and there's so many books out there on habits, but I feel like the way that James Clear talked about habits and how practical it was to start utilizing it was one of the best I had heard it. So we'll also drop that in the show notes for people to go check out that book as well. Yeah, see,
awesome.
this has been such an amazing conversation. Oh my goodness, from us talking about, your experiences from going, from your work in engineering to how you started to use that from like, what did you say? You called it human engineering. I just love that. What a great way. And how you were able to transform your relationships with your family and also then get into a space where now you can help other people with this. And I think overarching again, just people leaning into that curiosity and sharing with us, what people can do, that self-compassion, practicing it outward, asking yourself the what, how, tell me more. So amazing. And thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I always love to end the podcast with the question around It Starts With You. So the name of the podcast is called It Starts With You. In a few words, Yasi, what does It Starts With You mean to you?
I'm really, I like the idea of be the change you want to be in the world. And I don't remember who said that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do believe it that if I'm not willing to put my effort to try to role model, and I keep on wanting to do what people call is the famous salute of pointing everywhere else but me,
Mm-hmm.
then why would the world get better? Why would I get better? And so the name of your podcast to me is truth.
Mm-hmm.
It does start with me. Everything starts with me because that's where I am. It's all in my head, and then I, as I say, make up my stories and make my assumptions, and then that triggers all my life. And so, if I can own that it starts with me, then everything else changes. I try to tell people if you changed one ingredient in a recipe, would the flavors of the recipe change? And everyone says, yeah, of course. So if I change one element in my relationships, and that's me, all my relationships will change too.
Hmm. I mean, perfect example. If anyone's ever switched up the salt and the sugar amounts in a cookie recipe, I mean, that's going to change the flavor. So I love that example. That's such a great like visual. I'm such a visual person. That's such a great visual. It's like if you change even just one thing,
Right.
because I think sometimes people feel like they listen and they're like, I have to do this and this and this. What if you just started right where you are with one thought different, one moment different, one conversation different? And I really believe that the work that you're doing, again, because you're helping leaders individually and you're helping teams and the people who have the honor of listening to you speak, but you have this like energy that can vibrate throughout the whole world. And I know from our talk, like I feel like you're driven by this deeper impact of like how could we change the world collectively if we all work on this. And the more that we get you out there and people like you doing this work, that's how we change. That's how we change it. So thank you so much. People are going to listen to this and they are going to want to hear more from you, Yasi. So where can people find you or stay connected with you after listening to the podcast?
Thank you. So the simple answer is LinkedIn. I keep on thinking, and I've spoken to you, Julie, about creating a website and all of that. And for the moment, focusing on the things that I really want to focus on. LinkedIn is the space to connect, to have the conversations, and we go from there. And I really welcome everyone to reach out. I just recently put that scheduling link piece on my LinkedIn page, so you can even easily set some time with me. And I love connecting with people, and I do feel that it's so purposeful to try and be the change that I want to be in the world.
Thank you so much. We'll drop Yassi's LinkedIn in the show notes as well. Definitely connect with him so that you can stay tuned for all this amazing content he's going to be sharing out on LinkedIn and talking more about all of these ideas of what we talked about and helping you with those things. And then, of course, as I always say with every guest, thank you for joining us. And for those of you listening, as the biggest thank you is let Yasi know that you listened. Tell him what you took away from the podcast. Share this out on any of your social media platforms. Send people the link to the podcast and then tag us, tag Yasi and myself so that we can thank you. And this just helps get this message out to even more people so that we can help more people to do this. So thank you so much again for joining us. Thank you everyone
You're
for
so welcome.
listening. And remember that it starts with you and that you can be the change.